The alien king gave his fragile daughter to a human, but she became a fearsome warrior. The throne room of the Xal'Raga Empire was a sight to behold, towering crystalline pillars pulsed with energy, illuminating the faces of the gathered warlords, diplomats, and royal guards. At the center of it all stood King Xal'Raga, his bioluminescent scales shifting in nervous agitation. The Xal'Raga were one of the oldest and most powerful races in the galaxy, but their people were not warriors. They were scholars, rulers, and strategists. Their empire had endured through alliances, not brute force. But now, war had come. The enemy, the warlike Drekkar, had crushed entire Xal'Raga fleets. Their savage warriors thrived in combat, and they had issued an ultimatum: surrender the royal bloodline or face annihilation. The king had only one choice: hide his only daughter, Princess Vaelari, somewhere the Drekkar would never suspect. And so, against the protests of his council, he handed her over to a human. Humans were a relatively new species in the galactic stage, a wild card among the great empires. They were physically unremarkable compared to many species, but they had something the Xal'Raga lacked: an almost reckless resilience, a knack for survival, and a relentless spirit. And so, King Vaelari called upon Captain Dorian Graves. Dorian was a former Special Forces operative, a veteran of conflicts both on Earth and beyond. He had retired to a quiet colony world, but his reputation had endured. When the king offered him a fortune to take Vaelari to the fringes of the galaxy and keep her hidden, he didn't hesitate. Year 1, the fragile princess. When Dorian first met Vaelari, she was as delicate as the story said. Her translucent skin shimmered with soft violet hues, her luminous eyes wide with fear. She had never been outside the palace walls, never held a weapon, never eaten anything that wasn't a carefully cultivated delicacy. She was, in every sense, fragile. Dorian knew that if she remained so, she was dead. "You can't keep running forever, kid," he told her one evening as they camped on the remote jungle moon of Vesper Prime. "One day, they're gonna find you." She looked at him, horrified. "You said you would protect me." "I will," he said. "But you have to learn how to protect yourself too." At first, she resisted. The Xal'Raga abhorred violence. Their hands were made for diplomacy, not battle. But survival was no longer a matter of preference. Dorian drilled her in self-defense, blade work, and marksmanship. He taught her how to move unseen, how to use her small frame and speed against larger foes. She failed more times than she succeeded. She cried in frustration, collapsed from exhaustion, and once, she even tried to flee. But Dorian never gave up on her. And eventually, she stopped giving up on herself. Year 3, the warrior awakens. 3 years passed. Vaelari was no longer the frightened girl who had been entrusted to him. Her once delicate body had hardened with muscle, her movements were precise and deadly. She could wield a plasma blade as well as any human soldier, and her marksmanship had surpassed even Dorian's. But more than that, she had developed something far more dangerous: resolve. One night, as they sat by the fire under the twin moons of Vesper Prime, Dorian studied her. "You're not the same girl I met," he said. Vaelari gave him a small, knowing smile. "Good." Then the Drekkar found them. They came like a storm, drop ships darkening the sky, warriors clad in obsidian armor pouring out in waves. Dorian and Vaelari fought side by side, cutting through the enemy, but they were outnumbered. Dorian was gravely wounded. With his last ounce of strength, he pressed a blooded hand to Vaelari's shoulder. "Run," he rasped. She looked at him, eyes blazing. And then she did something he never expected. She didn't run. She turned and charged straight into the heart of the Drekkar forces. And the slaughter began. The legend of the Xal'Raga War Maiden. The Battle of Vesper Prime was supposed to be a footnote in history, a minor skirmish in the Drekkar conquest. Instead, it became a legend. The Drekkar warriors, feared throughout the galaxy, were utterly annihilated, not by an army, not by a fleet, but by a single warrior. The stories said she moved like a ghost, her plasma blades carving through the enemy like fire through dry grass. The few who survived spoke of glowing eyes and a terrifying, relentless fury. When the battle was over, she did not return to hiding. She took the fight to the Drekkar. Vaelari became a name whispered in fear. The warlords of the Drekkar sent entire battalions to crush her, only for their forces to be found slaughtered, their warships reduced to drifting wrecks. And then, one fateful day, she stormed the Drekkar High Command itself. The Xal'Raga had never waged war. But Vaelari was no longer just Xal'Raga. She was something new. A warrior forged by humanity. The return of the warrior queen. When Vaelari returned to the Xal'Raga homeworld, she was no longer the fragile princess who had been sent away. She strode into the throne room clad in the armor of a warrior, the insignia of the Drekkar warlords she had slain displayed on her belt. The court fell silent. The king, her father, rose from his throne, his hands trembling. "My daughter," he whispered. She knelt before him, placing the severed crown of the Drekkar warlord at his feet. "The war is over," she said. "The Drekkar will trouble us no more." Her father, the great king of the Xal'Raga, sank to his knees before her. "What have you become?" Vaelari looked at Dorian, who stood at her side, scarred but alive. And she smiled. Stronger. Epilogue: The human influence. Word of the Xal'Raga War Maiden spread across the galaxy. The fragile race that had once been seen as weak now had a legend among them, a warrior who had defied fate itself. Other Xal'Raga took notice. For centuries, they had dismissed humans as reckless, as brash. But now they saw the truth: humans were not strong because of their bodies. They were strong because they refused to break. And now, the Xal'Raga had learned that lesson as well. Vaelari stood at the head of a new era, the first of her people to embrace the warrior's path. And behind her, more would follow. Dorian watched as the next generation of Xal'Raga trained in the ways of battle, their once delicate hands now steady with weapons forged for war. He smirked. Humanity really is a bad influence. Vaelari grinned, drawing her blade. The best kind.